Welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm Nikki Wallman. Isaac Ochberg was born in the Ukraine and emigrated to South Africa in 1894, where he became a very successful businessman. As a philanthropist and ardent Zionist, he's probably best known for his humanitarian work in bringing some 200 children from the Ukraine and Poland to South Africa after World War I.
It was 1921, before Hitler, before Stalin. They lived in the most dangerous of times, in the most dangerous of places, and they were just vulnerable children.
Things were very hard there.
I was an animal, I wasn't a human being.
We were the lucky ones. I don't know why.
One man made it his mission to save them.
To bring our children, put himself into danger. He was much more than just an ordinary man.
He was a great man.
Isaac Ochberg was born in Uman in the late 1800s. He was the son of Russian parents who his father came to South Africa in the early 1900s, and shortly thereafter, Ochberg must have been about 16 or 17, he followed his father to Cape Town, where he stayed with him in a home in Woodstock and started off actually grinding coffee. He quickly developed himself into a really wealthy business entrepreneur, and it was in his position as benefactor of the Jewish community that, together with his ardent passion for Zionism, he became head of the Cape Jewish Orphanage. And it was then, round about 1920, when he heard about the plight of the homeless Jewish orphans in and around Eastern Europe.
In Odessa, one of the worst pogroms of all took place. Militant right-wing agitators enlisted hooligans and criminals, and aided and abetted by sympathetic police and military officials, they went on a ferocious rampage of death and destruction. Over 4 days in October, they killed over 500 Jews and wounded thousands more, leaving families broken and desolate.
My Oma, my maternal grandmother, is an Ochberg orphan herself. And she tells the story of how her parents used to say to them always, if the pogroms come, if the Cossacks come, if there's a pogrom in our shtetl, you children need to go to the forest. You need to go to the woods which surrounded their shtetl. And they taught the children the bark, the berries, the leaves, the fruit of which trees and which bushes they could eat to sustain them. And it happened during the time of the pogroms that sometimes they were in the forest for a couple of hours and sometimes a couple of days. And she tells the story of when they came back to the shtetl, they would arrive and look down at their little village, which was kind of nestled in a little bit of a valley. And it was the most beautiful sight, because what they saw was this pink snow wonderland. If you've ever had those snow globes that you turn upside down, they had this beautiful pink snow covering their village and making it look as if it was a pink fairy tale wonderland. But on closer inspection, they realized that what they were looking at was the blood-soaked feathers. The feathers that had been slashed and cut from the perinas, or the duvets that the Cossacks had slashed to try and get to the people who were cowering underneath for safety. And these blood-stained feathers had mingled with the blood of the people cowering underneath them and were just falling down over the village, transforming it into this unearthly pink wonderland. And my Oma's sister, till the day she died, could never wear clothing that was mixed, that had the colors red and white mixed together, because this image stuck so vividly in their minds.
One of the officers caught all of one of the little boys. You can just imagine how old we were, 5, 6 years of age. And he grabbed him by the neck, he took out his sword, and he was showing us I was going to cut his head off. And his head underneath and the mother saw it. Yeah, I remember it. She was never the same again.
On March the 18th, 1921, Isaac Ochberg left Cape Town by sea for Europe. He lingered in London and Paris for a while, but by June the 4th, he had set up his headquarters in Warsaw, and in the 2 months that followed, he engaged in a frenzied series of trips collecting his orphans.
Once he identified where these children were, he then went back to the various orphanages and took 8 from this one, 6 from this one, 3 from that one. He would find children sometimes lying in the pavements, in the gutters, and would pick them up and take them along with him. Where there were siblings, where the older siblings were older than 16, in order to try and keep the families together, he would bring them out as carers, childminders, nurses, teachers, educators, and so in this way try and keep as many of the family together as he could.
There was 3 orphanages, Jewish orphanages in Pinsk. From our orphanage we took, I think, 36 children, and he marched them to a certain destination. So I said to the children, to my brothers, took their hands, I said, come, let's go after them. They won't know who they took, who they didn't take. I said, come, let's go after them. And I wasn't a bit afraid, but I knew in my mind that they wouldn't send little children back home to nowhere.
One of the momentous achievements in the history of the South African Jewish community was the rescue of 200 Russian orphans in 1921. On hearing of the death and devastation of the Jewish communities during the civil war between the communists and white armies in Russia, Isaac Ochberg evolved a plan to rescue as many Jewish orphans as he could.
On the 19th of August 1921, the children boarded the train in Warsaw to leave behind their European nightmare forever.
My passion for this whole story is fueled by the fact that my Oma, my maternal grandmother, is an Ochberg orphan herself. I didn't know that as a little child when I used to speak to her about when she was a little child, but being very close to her, I used to ask her constantly, Oma, please tell me what it was like growing up as a child. And she would never answer me. Her stock answer was always, Laurenkie, I was too poor to be a child. I never had a childhood. And so to my child's mind, I imagined my Oma arriving on this earth as an adult. And eventually, as I became older and older, I realized there had to be more to the story than what she was telling me. And I would keep on asking her constantly. So when she told me that she was an Ochberg orphan and had been brought to South Africa by Isaac Ochberg in 1921, I realized just how inextricably my future was linked with her past, and why it was so important for me, without having known why, to understand where she came from and what her story was and how she was brought to South Africa. Together with my cousin, we felt that something had to be done to honor the memory of Isaac Ochberg. Something had to be done to acknowledge the work that he had done and the difference to the lives and destinies that the actions of just one man had made. And of the original 200 orphans, there are now close to 4,000 descendants scattered all over the world. So I started looking at as many documents as I could, and so began really a frantic mission to try and find as many of these orphans as I could. And it was quite interesting that children who I'd grown up with and become very close to, I only realized a little bit later that their grandparents, like mine, were also Ochberg orphans. And I managed to find about 11 Ochberg orphans between the times of about 1999 and 2003, and was able to then go and interview and get first-hand their accounts of their memories.
During our stay in London, Mr. Ochberg got ill. And he had ended up in hospital, and the children were very scared that he may die. So all the elder children were sleeping in the passages. They wouldn't leave the hospital because they were scared that if they lose him, what will happen to all of us?
Of the 200, my husband was one, and Isaac Ochberg must have sensed that he had to bring that little boy to South Africa, who became my husband.
He was a man that loved children. When he used to come to visit us, I want to tell you, it took him 3 hours to walk up the stairs. One child would pull at his little finger, the other one would pull at the jacket, the other one would pull at his trousers. He just couldn't move. So much the kids loved him. And to us, he was our daddy, Ochberg.
Isaac Ochberg had two great passions, Zionism and the orphan children that he rescued. He was an ardent Zionist and visited Palestine. When he died in 1937, he left what is still today the single largest amount ever left by an individual to the state of Palestine, now Israel. That bequest that was left by Ochberg in 1937 was used to buy land in the north, which today houses Kibbutzim Gal Ed and Kibbutz Dalia, both of which are today still thriving kibbutzim. And in fact, in July 2011, in order to celebrate the 90th anniversary of Ochberg's rescue mission, we had a 2-day gathering of all the descendants and of as many orphans as possible on Kibbutz Dalia. The JNF, together with the Ochberg Committee in Israel, came on board and very generously donated and contributed towards the upgrading of the Ochberg Memorial Park. And it is now the most exquisite park, and probably the most moving thing in that park is the Wall of Names. What we did was we took 200 plaques and we arranged them in a rockery. So many Ochberg orphan descendants who are now living in Israel, whose parents are buried in South Africa, will, to mark the anniversary of their parents' death, will come to the Ochberg Memorial Park and place a stone, which is the Jewish way of commemorating the anniversary of the passing of a loved one, and put a stone onto one of the plaques. I went just with my daughter to be present at the 90-year reunion in July 2011 in Israel. It was probably one of the most moving experiences that I've ever yet had, to be surrounded by 350 people, all of whom going right back to what fueled my passion for this project in the first instance, that fine line between death and the potential for life, and looking around at all these people. Ochberg orphans themselves, we had Sissy Harris there, who is 93 years old, still living in Haifa. She was present, an original Ochberg orphan. We had descendants, we had babies in prams, we had people that had come from all over the world, and looking at each person and understanding the ways in which Isaac Ochberg had touched their lives and destinies was so profound that there are no words to describe the feeling of understanding just how deep an impact the actions of one man can make on the lives and destinies of so many.
It just feels like we're just coming to a place with a lot of people who have the same story.
If he wasn't picked up by Ochberg, then we wouldn't be here, and Arnold and Raymond wouldn't be here, and it just would have ended that part of the family.
Grandpa didn't tell us anything. He told my mum a little bit, but we've just learned from other people, and my mum's done a lot of research, and we've studied a lot about Grandpa.
Celebration of life. On the 20th of December 2012, a memorial service for Isaac Ochberg was held at the Oranje Children's Home in Cape Town. In attendance were his grand and great-grandchildren, as well as descendants of the Ochberg orphans.
Good morning, Ochberg family members, Mrs. Molly Cohen, descendants of the Ochberg Orphans, representatives of community organizations, and friends. On behalf of Aranja, I'd like to welcome you all to this home, which is the physical embodiment of an organization which for 101 years is dedicated to caring for the vulnerable children of our community. We're here today to commemorate the 75th Yortzeit of Isaac Ochberg.
According to Jewish custom, the anniversary of the passing of a loved one is known as a Yortzeit, which is the Yiddish word for year. It's a yearly commemoration. And we go according to the Hebrew date of the person's passing, which this year, in the case of Isaac Ochberg, was on the 20th of December, 2012. And we decided that in order to honor his memory, besides having had the 90th year anniversary of his rescue mission in Israel, we wanted something in Cape Town as well, which is where Ochberg is buried together with his wife and his daughter in Maitland Cemetery. And so we decided that the most fitting event to honor Isaac Ochberg's memory would be to hold it at Oranje Children's Home, something that was so close to his heart.
It is moving beyond words for us to be here and to have met many now of Daddy Ochberg's children and grandchildren from that, and great-grandchildren. For our family, the greatest joy is knowing that the children he saved not only had rich and loving lives themselves, but that well over 3,000 descendants, almost 4,000, Lauren says now, and more all the time, are now living full, productive lives all over the world.
He was an exceptional person who was willing to take risks and willing to put himself at risk when he believed in something. So I think that's what gave him the capacity in that meeting to cut through all the red tape and say, well, if you're not going to do this, I will, because he had the resources both financially but also as a person.
You know, you see in his letters that, I mean, I'm a psychologist, so I sort of looked at all sorts of psychological reasons, but actually when I read all his letters, I think he just felt incredibly fortunate that somehow he and some of his family had come to Cape Town, and he didn't see it as his achievement. He saw it as incredible, God's gift somehow that he had done so well. And it absolutely pained him that there were people, that there were still pogroms, more pogroms, and children who were rummaging in the forests and eating soil and things, and it just broke his heart. And I think it was as simple as that, that he had the resources. He was a powerful man by then in the community, and he couldn't see any way that he could not go and save children if he could.
The event was attended by approximately 170 people, some of whom had come from all over the world in order to be present on that day and to pay their respects to a man who had changed their lives and the lives of their children, and for the most parts to pay respects to a man who, without him, would never be here today.
I feel like a star today.
Well, I think what moved me particularly today was meeting Molly and seeing such a radiant personality, such an obviously good, lively woman, and realizing that she personally was rescued by him. That's very moving to me. And seeing in her life and in her face, what it really means, what he really achieved.
Isaac Ochberg, my old Daddy Ochberg. I was just a little girl when I came, and that's what we called him, and that's how it remained with me forever.
I feel quite amazing, because when in the speech today, when one person asked how many are descendants, a massive number of people were raising their hands, and I'm just thinking what a wonderful man he is, and so many descendants of those people he saved are now here today, and they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him and his marvellous work.
I just feel quite, amazed, because,
this is what happens to people you see on television, not like me or my dad or my brother or anyone in my family, really. It's just, I feel amazed.
I think what he left us was this attitude of philanthropy, that we were very fortunate, we had a good life, and we had to pay something back in whatever way we could. And, you know, my husband knows it's the sort of thing that we do to follow in his footsteps, really.
It's my belief that if you're on your soul's true path, if you're on your soul's mission, then the universe conspires to put everything possible in your path to help you attain that objective. And so it was with this project, that it seemed as if information, people with their expertise, with their kindness, with their generosity, seemed to materialize out of nowhere and just seamlessly and effortlessly walk into this project and help me get to the next stage. And the humbling experience that I had in interviewing these orphans when they spoke about the horrors that their eyes as children had seen, you can understand why in later years there were no words to describe that to anybody. But I think that together with understanding that being in the twilight years of their lives, that if they didn't tell their story would die with them. And so it is with me, with the 4,000 other descendants scattered all over the world, the deep, profound gratitude and acknowledgement that had it not been for Isaac Ochberg, none of us would be here today.
In 1920, Isaac Ochberg dared to dream a dream of saving hundreds of children from a ravaged, torn land. Less than a year later, he had made his dream a reality. This unlikely man of action had shown vision, leadership, and bravery. Today, in a 21st century world dominated by war, genocides, and suffering that virtually defy understanding and belief, with tens of millions of displaced people and orphans, Isaac Ochberg's legacy is a reminder that a small act can make a big difference, and one should never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's show. Thank you so much for being with us. And if you'd like to catch up on any shows you've missed, you can find them on our website at www.spiritsister.co.za. And of course, you can find us on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions. As always, from me, Nikki, and the team, shalom and have a safe and peaceful week.